I'm going to call to order the November the 1st, 2010 work session of the Board of Commissioners. I want to thank everybody that's present here and as well as viewing. Commissioner Caruth called about 30 minutes ago and said he is trying to make it here. He had a business appointment that is delaying him, and he should be 10 minutes, be here in about 10-15 minutes, I believe. In any event, we do have the agenda that's before everyone. If you please look over it and see if there's any corrections or amendments that we need to make. I do want to call everyone's attention. There is a backside to page 4, which adds new business item G6 and old business item E3. If there are no discussions and no amendments, if we can have a motion to approve the agenda. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. As it relates today, I do not believe there's any discussion that needs to be had for this board as it relates to E1, the discussion selection process for a building contractor. If there is, let me know. Okay. And then under E2 is legal staff commerce, the act to amend the Permit Extension Act of 2009, which was tabled from September. Do we need to have any further discussion on that at this point in time? Because we will have that presentation, I believe, by Mr. Marshall or Ms. Morris come September the 15th, or the 15th. Oh, you ready? You want to let us know where we are?
And they are all proceeding with recognizing the one-year extension, the new dates. As part of your information, you do have a discussion from the School of Government that talks about this legislation and how it potentially impacts projects. Staff has done some research, and the county has about 8 projects where they have not moved forward with platting or permitting. All of the other projects, however, have seen some activity. So that's kind of where we're at. If you all would like any additional information, then I would need to know what it is that you would like. But we thought that the School of Government piece should be very helpful. And then, it's just kind of difficult to predict whether or not projects will move forward. So the best that, we could do is to tell you that there are about 8 projects that haven't seen any activity. And those are county projects. All the other projects that we're carrying as far as school and adequate public facilities, for those purposes, the towns and cities are all recognizing the one-year extension. So for the APF, for the consent agreements and the voluntary mitigation agreements, we would have to carry those on the books because they've been given approvals by the towns and cities for that additional year. So it would just be that very small number of county projects that we would be dealing with, and I don't know if our attorney has anything that he'd like to add to that.
What's the decision before our board is whether we extend it for an additional year, I believe it is.
That's correct.
And that would expire, if we extended it, that would be an extension through December 31st, 2011.
It would be an extension of the time that was told from January of 2008 through December of 2010. So that first round is getting ready to expire in December. So if you all wanted to extend it, it would probably be best if you could take some sort of action before the end of the year. Or if you don't want to extend it, because then we do have to pass a resolution stating that.
Okay.
But understand that doesn't mean that those approvals expire at the end of the year. They have the amount of time that they had accrued prior to that extension that's tacked on to the end of that period. In other words, if they had 6 months left as of January 1st, 2008, they still have 6 months after December 31st, 2010. And that would be the same with this additional one-year extension as it was under the original legislation. So that does vary from project to project.
So
the
either
6 month or 10
whatever,
month, whatever the time.
Whatever it may be, yes.
Right, so the dates that we have now recognize that additional, the December 31st, 2010 date plus the time that was told. So if we didn't move forward, we would still recognize those dates. If you chose to move forward with the additional year, then it would be essentially, it would move to that date in 2011 or at some point in the future. But the minimum you would be looking at would probably be December of 2011, probably January or February for some of those projects to start coming off the books.
Does anybody have any questions for Mrs. Morris?
I mean, the point of extending for a year is to be supportive of the building industry and hope that the economy turns around and that they decide to build. That's the reason to extend it for another year. That's correct.
It would extend the projects that have not already done any work on.
It would extend everything.
It would
If
extend
they
it.
had a valid approval between January of 2008 and December 31st of 2010, they get extended for that period of time after December 31st. So there are some folks out there who have almost 3 additional years based on the current legislation because they were right at the beginning of their approval. So they had that 2 years, 24 months, plus the time that got told. So some of them are pushed out to 2013 at this point.
The building industry was very supportive of this legislation.
I mean, I would think that they would be, so, I mean, I don't have a problem with extending it out the other year. Like the legislature, not opting out is what it amounts to, right?
Correct. Do you want to put this under new business for any further discussion or put it under consent agenda?
If we're going to vote on putting it on the consent agenda, I'm not going to vote on this issue because I think I'm involved in this,
Okay.
correct?
That's correct.
I would put it under make a motion to put it under the consent agenda.
Okay.
Leave it there.
For approval, not for opting out.
Correct.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a well.
Well, do we really need to do anything? If we're not opting out, do we really need to do anything?
Yes. I think we have to have an affirmative answer one way or the other.
I think the way the legislation reads, that if you do nothing, it automatically extends it a year. You have to do something to opt out.
Okay. Well, then we don't have to do anything. Does that give y'all enough clarification, Mrs. Morris?
Yes, we will start generating those new dates.
Okay.
That could just come off the agenda. It can
Right.
just come off the agenda, right?
Yeah, we didn't. Okay, so we will not do anything, and it will not go on our consent agenda for November 15th. Next matter we have is the resolution pertaining to the future of animal shelter in Cabarrus County. That is a matter that Commissioner Kruth was going to discuss, so we can wait until Commissioner Kruth is able to attend or be here. Next is we've addressed the consent agenda, or do we have a motion to place the consent agenda from today onto the November the 15th consent agenda? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Next is new business G1, Kannapolis COPS Certificates of Participation Financing for the North Carolina Research Campus, page 50 of our agenda. Mr. Legg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Have with me Walter Goldsmith from the Davenport Company, one of our financial advisors, and Brent Jeffcoat, our bond counsel, who both of them, and with us also is Matt Davis with McGraw Woods and Janice Burke, who's with First Southwest Company. Also have our mayor and a city council member, Tom Kincaid, are with us, and some staff members. We will be brief. I'll give you about a 5-minute overview of sort of where we are and some of the particulars about what we'll talk about today. Then I'm going to turn it over to Brent to talk about the interlocal agreement, which is really the only document that this board will be asked to consider formally. And then Brent will turn it over to Walter, who will walk you through the plan of finance. As you all know, we have been through about 5 years of complex negotiations over this plan of finance for the North Carolina Research Campus. When this all started several years ago, The plan was for an aggressive tax increment financing plan to fund certain public improvements in response and to facilitate the private investments that Castle and Cook and in the future others would make in downtown Kannapolis to build the North Carolina Research Campus. We went through a series of negotiations between the city and the county over the particulars of this bond issue. At the time, it was $168 million. Then after those negotiations sort of halted somewhat, we went into a significant discussion with Castle and Cook over the particulars. Through all those negotiations, which occurred over the course of about 18 months, the economy started to struggle, and we no longer had the ability to proceed forward with that large of a bond issue. We downsized it somewhat, cut it in half, and about that time, the entire economy dropped off the face of the earth, and we had to regroup completely. And from that point, we started pursuing a much smaller bond issue and started looking at alternative forms of finance. And that's what we've been doing for the past year, is looking at ways to get pieces of this larger puzzle completed and implemented. The latest effort was to try to secure a bond rating for the tax increment financing transaction. That was not successful for a whole host of reasons, but the overall economic environment simply didn't get us to that point. So as of the past 3 months, 2 to 3 months, we've regrouped for hopefully the final time, and we've gone back to a method of finance that was actually suggested by the county early on in the process, but the city could not buy into it at the time because of the size of the bond issue. A certificates of participation approach at $168 million was just too much for the city to handle from a standpoint of security and guaranteeing the debt. We're in a much different situation with a $30 million bond issue, $30+ million bond issue, especially considering about half of the taxes paid on the research campus are paid by, essentially guaranteed by the state of North Carolina through the university and the community college leases, and we structure the debt around that. So with that, I will turn it over to Brent to walk you through very briefly the interlocal agreement, which is, again, the document we're asking the board to consider, and then we'll give you a little more detail about the plan of finance and then answer any questions. Brent?
Sure. What I did with the interlocal agreement, the intergovernmental agreement, is I thought about it a bit and I thought, wait a minute, we spent a lot of time and effort in negotiating the terms of this document. So the best thing for me to do will be to use the same document and only make such changes as are necessary to reflect the different form of financing, but to leave intact and in place precisely everything that the county had bargained for in the original agreement, and that's what we did. What you've got in front of you is a clean copy. I have shared with your counsel, Steve Cordell, a black-lined copy of the document to show exactly where the changes took place. And for the most part, although as I thumb through here, there are a number of places where there are changes. They're essentially changes to reflect that this is alternative financing. The guts of the agreement are still exactly the same, that Cabarrus County would contribute up to 1/2 of the debt service from incremental revenues, calculated the same way as they would have been before, and they would have no other responsibility other than that portion of the incremental revenues derived from the North Carolina Research Campus. That's it. So it doesn't reach into Cabarrus County's general tax base. It doesn't reach into Cabarrus County's general revenues. We also kept in some provisions that your finance team wanted to be able to take a look at the financing before it was actually done to make sure that it was consistent with good practice from the county's standpoint, as well as the cities, of course, but they wanted to make sure that that your finance team had a chance to take a look at everything. And they wanted to make sure that before anything in the future would be done, it would come back to the county for another look, and that's the way this is set up, just as it was before. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm a lawyer, and I've got all night.
On the chart that you have here showing the projected revenues, are those are those the same numbers that were used before? Or have they been adjusted for future revow?
Commissioner Minot, that's a good segue into, why don't we let Walter just walk you through that document, and he can answer that question as part of it, if that works.
Okay, great. When it switch seats or great. Included in your packet is a presentation that starts on page 53, and I won't go through every page, but I'll hit what I think is the key point of your question, which is, if we're going to do this bond issue of roughly $35 million, how are we going to repay it? What is the source of revenues, and how do you get comfortable that those projected revenues are conservative? And so this slide that's on the screen, that's on page 54 in your packet, what this table shows in column A, B, and C, and you'll see the labels up at the top, shows the increase in the county's assessed values in the district. And then down at the bottom of the page in column A, B, and C, it shows what the incremental revenues are for the county share. And then on the right side of the page, it shows the same information for the city. So for example, if you're looking in column C, row 4, for total value, what you see is the total incremental value that's been created on the campus to date is $270 million. So that's if you take the assessed value on the day that we locked in the values, and then you look for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2010, and you subtract those two, you get to a total growth in assessed value of $270 million. Down below in column C, row 7, we took the county's tax rate and translated that into dollars, and so the incremental taxes that have been generated to date for the county are $1.7 million per year. The same information is then shown for the city. Off to the right, the city's incremental tax revenues were $1.3 million. So it's those two annual revenue sources, the $1.3 million from the city and the $1.7 million from the county, that we're talking about using as the revenues to repay the debt. And the intergovernmental agreement that Brent was just talking about, as you recall, what the county said that it would do is it would use its incremental revenues, that $1.7 million, to pay up to half of the debt service. So you would never have to pay more than 50%, and you would only have to pay to the extent you actually receive those $1.7 million, that $1.7 million in revenues.
Well, can you stop right there?
Yes, sir.
That's not what I understand. It would be $1.3 million because we pay no more than what the city is.
Exactly. So now I'm gonna use that and jump to the next page. So because of that constraint, that the county would never pay more than half, then because the city's revenues are lower at 1.3, that effectively means the county will never have to pay more than the 1.3. So if you then go over to page 56, if you'll skip one more slide forward, this directly answers your question of, well, how do we project out what the future revenues are going to be? So you'll see in that first year, June 30, 2010, we assume $1.3 million from each, 1.3 from the city and 1.3 from the county. It gets us to a total of $2.6 million that we have available.
I think you're missing my question. My question is that these numbers were generated prior to the economic situation. Now these properties will not have the value that they're showing in these previous numbers. Does that not make a difference?
Well, these have been updated. So these reflect, what we've done is we said.
How have they been updated?
If you remember back 4 years ago when we first started talking, it was all about projected future development. So no building had actually occurred on the campus, and we were just taking the projected build-out schedule from Castle and Cook, and we were saying, if they build this building in this year and this building in the next year, then here's what we project those revenues would be. It was purely based on a build-out schedule. What we've now said to factor in the economic reality that we live with, we've said let's only base our revenues off of the buildings that have been built to date. So let's assume that not a single building is ever built. Then, so the growth will come from two areas in the projected revenues.
My question goes back, though. Are we using the value of the buildings that have been built? Where is our base value? Because I mean, I know for a fact that the numbers are going to come in considerably lower than they were when we started this. So I just, does
Yeah.
that not make a difference in the, am I missing something? Maybe I'm
Well,
just not thinking clearly. But I don't see where that's reflected if these are the,
These,
Well, I think what you're referring to, and I agree, is that we've had a discussion that with reval, instead of what has happened in the past, when you do a reval, the value of your property has gone up. We have a concern with the next reval, the value of the property is going to go down.
Right.
And so there is no going down projected into this, and the concern would be that when we do the reval, the actual tax base is going to be lower than what it is now.
Yeah, what this doesn't factor in is any additional development at all in the district. So all it would take is a couple of buildings over the course of the debt to make up that difference, and that will likely occur. And that's been sort of the concept of the TIF from the beginning, is that it's
but
paid
if the
for as revenues.
if the taxes that you're projecting from a piece of property are is the value of the property previously, before it's revaluated,
Currently, it's the current value.
it's been revalued?
No, this is the current value.
How are you getting the current value?
It's the value from the last assessment.
Exactly, you're
Right.
making my point.
Right, no, I understand.
My point is that and when it's revaluated, it's going to go down, so your revenues are going down.
Correct.
So should we not, I mean, this is not what you're actually
well, I
going to
think
receive.
we can run those scenarios if you'd like.
I mean, is that a moot point, or?
Well, I think it is from the county's perspective, because if the values were to go to zero on the county side, your obligation is only to contribute the revenues to the extent you receive them. So if the value declines, either through revaluation or for whatever other reason, and you don't receive the revenues, then that obligation becomes the city's.
Not only, well, I understand the county's protected, but I mean, some taxpayer somewhere is going to have to make these payments, so it would seem to me some more accurate numbers would be in line.
Well, I guess from our side, we'll run any scenarios you'd like. There were the two sides of growth, either coming from growth in assessed value or from new development. And we zeroed out the new development, just to be conservative, and factored in what we thought was pretty conservative growth in the assessed value. If you'd like us to go back and zero out the growth in assessed value, then I think we'd want to revisit whether we were being too conservative in assuming that no future development occurs on the campus. But our thought was.
Since I won't be here to worry about it, I'll let them. It's just a point.
Right.
And the reason it's brought home to me today, I just figured out on our particular business property, our property just went down 7% in a reval when it was reassessed. Not reassessed, but reevaluated for privately. So it's going down. And I don't know how much, but it's going to go down.
One thing I don't, from what I understand in regards to the value, today, the value of the research campus, the property there is, one, because of the uniqueness of it, is that it may not and probably will not go down on the reval in 2013. Now, I have not heard that from our tax administrator's mouth himself, but that's what I understand. Number two is, but still in the same lines that you're thinking, Commissioner Minot, is my concern is the valuations or revals only occur every 4 to 8 years, but yet we're showing an increase of 3% every year. Why would you show an increase of every year if it's not going to be revalued every year, and we're not going to receive a change? We're not going to have a change in tax revenue. If there's no growth, which you've assumed, then there's not going to be an increase in valuation every year in between the reval periods. So we would not realize between 2013 and 2017, you would not realize an increase of 3% each one of those years if there's no new commercial growth of profitable companies as opposed to nonprofits. So my question would be, why did you put in 3% for each year when we only do revaluations every 4 or 8 years?
Right. But no magic reason other than, again, we were faced with, do we want to factor in some growth in development and growth every reval period, and we felt like that was too aggressive. And so you look at that on one end of the spectrum and you say, well, we could assume decline in assessed value and no development on the other end, and we felt like that was too conservative. So within that bookended spectrum, we wanted to be more towards the conservative side, but maybe not all the way to assume a decline in assessed value and no future development. And I think somewhere generally at that end of the spectrum is where we want to be, and how you get there, whether you start to assume new buildings and no reval, or new buildings and decline in assessed value. I think you will generally end up at that sort of end of the spectrum. And I don't think it's going to impact significantly the projected revenues one way or the other.
Well, I agree with I believe that there's not going to be a change in the revaluation because of the uniqueness of the buildings. However, I'm not satisfied that there's going to, if your next, I believe you said that there was, well, it says here is, and no further development on the campus, then you're having a 3% growth annually, and I'm not willing to take that leap annually. It may be 3% over 4 years, but not annually.
I understand the point
Okay.
perfectly, yes, sir. And again, I'm not.
Okay.
I think we're saying the same thing, that we want to be on that conservative end of the spectrum in projecting revenues, and I don't think we're very far off in what the end result would be.
Okay.
Maybe where you push on the balloon to get there, we might be pushing in different areas, but it's going to get us, I think, to that far right column on page 3, this one that you see on the screen, which is not dramatic growth. This is much more conservative than what you saw 4 years ago in terms of projected revenue growth, and which is why we show these revenues supporting a $35 million bond issue as opposed to aggressive growth that might support a much larger bond issue.
Okay.
If you'll turn to the next page, page 57, we showed what we refer to as the sources and uses of funds. That is, if we were to issue $35.3 million or $35,340,000 in bonds, where that money would be deposited. And you can see under the uses of funds that roughly $31 million goes into what we call the project fund. That's to be spent on the actual projects. We've assumed a debt service reserve fund of $3.5 million. That's money that would be put into a reserve fund held by the bond trustee and would be used if there were ever a default by the city in paying the annual debt service expenses. We obviously don't expect that there would ever be a default by the city, and so that money would then be available to make the debt service payment in the final year. In the interim, it's invested, and the interest earnings that flow off of that can be used to reduce the annual debt service payments. We've assumed capitalized interest of $780,000. Our understanding is that the county for the current year and next year has already budgeted how it would use the $1.7 million in incremental revenues for other purposes, and so we've assumed that the county would not have any debt service obligation in those initial 2 years, and then we would then step up the debt service to bring that online from the county's perspective. The delivery date expenses of roughly $966,000 are the cost of issuance associated with the bond issue. Those include the underwriting fee paid to the underwriter, fees paid to the rating agencies, to the local government commission, to the attorneys, the advisors, the administrative cost associated with it, and then the additional proceeds of $1,248 we have to round off to the nearest $5,000 when we're selling bonds. We sell them in $5,000 denominations. So then if you'll flip to the next page, page 50.
Before we get off that page,
Yes, sir.
may I have some questions about that?
Please.
Or does anybody have any questions about this page? Couple things. Is under the debt service reserve, would it be less expensive to purchase insurance as opposed to debt service reserve?
Potentially, and we would investigate that, but the issue there is often when you purchase that insurance, you're now exposed to that provider of the insurance, and all of those bond insurers that were in that business have all now been downgraded below the AAA level. And so if you purchase that surety and then they're downgraded in the future, there's the potential that you may then have to fund it with cash. and the money that you use to buy that surety is just, it is sunk cost at that point. So we'd rather at this point be conservative, show that we fully fund it with cash, and then we can look at those options, and if that's something that the city and the county want to do, we can certainly do that.
And also under the cost of issuance, and somebody from the county, if you can correct me, but I think that when we financed our jail, or the housing unit, it was larger than this, and our cost of issuance was a third of this. Is there a reason why the cost of issuance is 3 times that amount? And we borrowed, I think it was $80 million.
It was in that neighborhood.
And our cost of issuance was about $200,000. Is there a reason why there's a difference, number one? And then number two is, why, if the county is not paying for or if the county is not borrowing the money, why is the county paying for the issuance of $750,000?
Sure. Let me take them one at a time. The first question, why the cost of issuance are $750,000 compared with the county's cost. If you were to put those sort of side by side, line item by line item, there's some cost between the bond issue that you did in 2009 and this one that would be identical. Local government commission fees, rating agency fees, printing cost, those would be identical. Then you get into the fact that this is a complex transaction and has taken 5 years to put together, and a tremendous amount of time, legal expense-wise, advisory expense-wise. And so, anything that takes that amount of time, I think, is going to cost a considerable amount more, as opposed to what I would call a typical plain vanilla governmental financing, a jail, a school, a courthouse, where you're using standard documents. You're bringing the lawyers in and you're saying, pull the documents off the shelf that you used last time, update them. You would expect those costs to be much, much lower for that transaction, as opposed to this one, where we were working with the tax increment financing approach first, starting with blank pages to draft those documents, and then have since shifted from that to the certificates of participation structure. So I think that's the reason that the legal expenses are higher. The underwriter's underwriter's discount that we've assumed is probably a little bit lower than what the county traditionally pays. We've assumed that the underwriter, in this case, would charge $5 a bond. I think the county pays, Pam might have that answer, I think it's closer to $7 a bond. And so I think on a line item by line item basis, most of those costs you would say are either the same, or where it's taken a considerable amount of more time, that you would see those to be higher.
Well, in regard, so you're asking the county to pay for the TIF legal fees and not the COPS legal fees?
I think if that were an issue, the city would.
Yeah, I think if that's a sticking point, we can certainly.
I'm just trying to understand it. That's, I'm not
Yes,
saying.
that's an
Okay.
accurate statement.
Okay.
But if that's a sticking point, we can work through that.
And then, okay, thank you. Any other questions from page 57? Thank you.
I was just going to ask Pam on the debt surface reserve. Pam, I thought you were. Is that what we normally do?
Debt service reserve? No. It has to do with the ratings. Is that not correct?
That's right. When the county has issued COPS in the past, the county has pledged that it would use its general fund to appropriate annually to make the payments. So you're, at that point, on the hook for the bonds. In this case, what the county said is that you want to be arm's length, you don't want any recourse, and you want your only obligation to be, to the extent their revenue is available, that you'll pay from those revenues. But if they're not, it doesn't come back to the general fund. And so when you get that arm's length separation, where these are not COPS issued by the county, but these are COPS issued by the city, and then the county has this intergovernmental. From a rating agency perspective, this transaction will be rated much lower than if it were debt of the county. And that's just been the direction all along, that the county didn't want to be on the hook with its pledge supporting this. The county wanted to support it to the extent there were revenues available. And I realize that sounds like probably a minor difference, but from a rating agency perspective, that's a considerable difference. And that's why we have to have a reserve fund in this transaction.
If the funds are not available, who pays for them?
The city in this case, not the county. And if that's an issue that's on the table, that the county is willing to put that same kind of pledge behind this issue that it does behind its COPS issues, then we would have a much higher rating, no reserve fund, and much lower interest rates. But to get that separation, if you will, that arm's length separation, we end up with a reserve fund, a lower rating, and higher interest rates.
Then if that's the case, then I'm having a hard time understanding. I understand the idea that the county, the revenues generated from the district that the county would normally receive, we are pledging to pay half of the debt service. And on your first slide, that would be up to $1.7 million in today's valuation.
Well, 1.3 because the debt
1.3,
service
excuse me.
Yes, sir.
But the county is receiving revenues of 1.7. In the repayment schedule, the repayment will not, the highest the debt service will be is $3.1 million, which is less than 1.7. So we will, even if we're talking about today, the revenues will still be less than what the actual debt service is, right? If you go to the next slide,
Right,
the pledged incremental revenues
right.
is, the debt service in 2027 is $2.836 million, right?
Yes, sir.
So that's 1.4 that the
Yes,
county
sir.
would have to pay. That's less than what we're receiving in revenues right now at 1.7.
That's correct. Correct.
So if, no matter what, we'll always be under the 1.7, will be less than 1.7, then why do we have to worry about the debt service coverage or anything like that? I mean,
Why do you care?
well, not that why do I care, but why is it a problem or a concern of a rating agency?
Because it's not your debt, it's our debt. It's the city's debt.
Right. So let's take that, going back to your example of revaluation decreasing the value. So taking that last year as an example where half of the debt service would be $1.4 million. If the value of the campus has declined over time and your incremental revenues are, let's just say, only $1 million, so half of the debt service is 1.4, but your incremental revenues are only $1 million, you're only obligated up to that $1 million. Now, if these were COPs issued by the county, then you'd be obligated for the full amount.
Right.
And it's that protection that the county wanted, that it would never be obligated for more than half of the debt service and only to the extent that it actually receives those revenues, that resulted in this structure.
You stated that the debt is of the city of Kannapolis, but is there nothing that this interlocal agreement, when it goes to the local government commission, will not show some stability for the payment? Because you have an interlocal agreement with the county?
You're asking, will you pre-audit it before you sign it?
No,
or-
what I'm saying is because if we commit to the interlocal agreement and we're paying half of the debt, would there not be anything supportive even with the rating agencies or with the local government commission, that even though the debt's in your name, we've signed an interlocal agreement stating that we will do the following?
That intergovernmental agreement would be very important to the rating agencies if you were obligating yourself to pay half of the debt service regardless of whether their incremental revenue is available or not. But once we've watered it down where your pledge is just to the extent those revenues are available, the rating agencies then don't look beyond that to say, well, what's the fiscal health of the county in general?
Right.
Because it's just based off of this district, right? So on this page, the screen that's up, what you see is we've structured the annual debt service. If you look at the column that says net debt service, the first 2 years it ramps up, so it's $117,000 in the first year, then $1.5 million, and then it levels off, if you will, at $2.8 million per year. From the chart to the right, those first 2 years for the county are zeroed out, again, because our understanding was that you've, at least internally from a planning perspective, you've obligated how you would plan to use your incremental revenues off of the district. So we've assumed that there are no incremental revenues available in those first 2 years, and then out in fiscal year ending June 30, 2013, then that's when the county begins to pay its half of the debt service. And then the chart out, the column out to the far right shows what we call the debt service coverage. That is, if you take the total revenues available divided by the net debt service that you're going to have in each year, the coverage is the cushion, if you will. And what it shows is if the revenues grow over time and you have level debt service, then that amount of cushion would continue to grow over time.
If the debt service payment is 1.4 million, why is it showing over here in this other column that we're pledging more than 1.4 million? That then would change your debt service coverage over here. I mean, if it's 1.4, it should be 1.4 in the county and just keeps it 1.4. So wouldn't you do that?
Sure, we could, absolutely, and that's what the intergovernmental agreement spells out. The idea with this chart was to say, if we've got debt service of $2.8 million, what are the projected revenues that are going to be available to pay that? And so that you get some sense of, for example, in that last year where the county's revenues are projected to be $2.148 million, your only obligation would be half of the debt service, or $1.4 million. We're trying to show in some sense that you would have extra revenues, if you will, after payment of the debt service.
But in reality, wouldn't it be, Cabarrus County would be consistent, and City of Kannapolis, their column would be increased if that's what they're going to do? You see what I'm saying? It
Right.
should, to accurately reflect what we're talking about. It's not, you just don't get the money and you just don't get the number and divide it in half. For instance, 2026 is 4.172. You just don't divide that in half. In that year, it should be 1.4, and then Kannapolis should be whatever their number's going to be, right?
I think so, or maybe the better way to adjust that chart, instead of saying pledged incremental revenues at the top, would be simply to say projected incremental revenues, and then I think that would better convey what the chart was intended to show.
Yeah, because I think what you're saying there is that you take that net debt service, that column, divide it in half, and that's what the county, so the county, what I come up with is pretty much levels out about $1.4 million for the county's obligation.
Yes, sir.
And so you subtract that from the county over there, what we see is available incremental revenues, and that's what you're going to get is the difference there. So
Exactly. Yes, sir.
we're, as long as we stay above $1.4 million.
Then you have excess revenues.
Okay.
Another way to think about it is the coverage number is really showing the cushion between what you pledged and what you actually have available.
Okay.
So you didn't pledge but 1 million, but you had a 1.4 million pool of revenues that you could pay it from.
Yeah.
So that indicates that you've got, what's that, a 40% coverage, 1.4 coverage on your pledged revenues. It doesn't mean that you pledged it, it just means that
Just
you got that
available,
much
yeah.
cushion. That's all it is.
But it's not a cushion from the county because the county isn't obligated over the $1 million.
No, it's not, but it's saying, well, you're only obligated to pay $1 million, but it looks like you're projected to have 1.4 million available to pay that $1 million. So even if our projections are way off, you still got enough to pay the 1 million. That's all.
Okay.
That's all it's showing.
And then in 2027, that's in essence a lump sum at the end?
The
'Cause it
6.4
jumps
million.
up to, right.
Correct, because that's when that debt service reserve fund that we were talking about on the
It's
previous
gonna
page,
kick
the
in
3.5
to cover
million,
that.
is then released.
Okay.
Right.
It pays off the balance of it.
And then the earnings each year of the 106,000 is what you're projecting to be the interest earned on that debt service? On that
Exactly.
10%
Exactly.
that's sitting there in some account?
Right.
Do you know what interest rate you have that projected at?
I don't, but it looks like it's probably ballparked at 3%, and the 30-year U.S. Treasury is at 4% today, so we were trying to be pretty conservative. Yeah, we wouldn't want to assume that we're going to, investment rates are pretty low right now. Right.
Don't we all know?
Right, unfortunately. Page 59, I'll let Mike cover, relates to the projects.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I can answer questions if you have them, but from the $31 million projected deposit into the project fund, about half of that would go towards the Cabarrus Health Alliance building. That $15 million is a total project cost, including the $8.3 million construction bid, and then a whole host of other things, land acquisition, furniture, medical equipment, things internal to the facility, engineering, those kinds of things. So the $15 million is a turnkey number to get the project completely done. Our downtown water system replacement, that is a project that we had a couple federal grants we needed to spend. That is underway now. If you've been in downtown Kannapolis lately, you will see that. We were trying to wait until this issue was resolved with the funding, but the city has gone ahead and fronted that cash over the past several months to get that done. There's a pedestrian tunnel and stormwater line, which is that's about half the cost shown there. That is, we received federal stimulus dollars to pay for half of that. That will be a DOT project that will pay for the remainder of that project. They have about $1.2 million waiting. There's about $7 million worth of reimbursements, both to the city and to Castle and Cook. And if you're interested, I can certainly get the board a breakdown of what that is, but largely that was the infrastructure you see in the ground today that supported the buildings that are built. The $300 million plus vertical construction that went on the campus had to have the roads, water, sewer, all of those things constructed. That was part of the original TIF plan. Castle and Cook spent upwards of $20 million on the public infrastructure that was what we had committed to in the original plan, and the city has spent upwards of $4 million. So this is a proportional reimbursement to both the city and Castle and Cook for certain expenditures to date. Improvements to a park next to the core laboratory building, interstate signage. We hope that $90,000 number will go down, and DOT will fund part of it, but it's in there as a total number for now. Final pavement on our North Main Street project, which was also one of the initial projects the city built as part of the campus construction. And then a new stormwater line which will open up about half of the campus to additional development on the northern side of the campus. When we converted to the COPS from a TIF, we gained through the lower interest rate, we gained revenues. And if, what I've recommended to our city council and what I'd recommend to the Board of Commissioners as well is to maintain the same project fund or the same bond amount to maximize, based on the debt service that we've been talking about for a couple of years, maximize the amount of revenues that we can put towards projects that were related to the original $168 million TIF. We've narrowed this $4.5 million number down to 3 projects we think are probably the most important to add to this list. And that's about a $5.5 million completion of the downtown utilities. That will be stormwater, streets, water's done, but sanitary sewer and streetscaping for some of the downtown streets. That would probably take a little extra cash than we have here. We'd pursue grants for the remainder. Alternatively to that would be $3.6 million for the reconstruction and capacity building at the intersection of Cannon Boulevard and Dale Earnhardt Boulevard. That was part of the original traffic study, and it built out of the research campus. That was going to be a required project, so it's always been in the plan to build that project. But that would be to add turn lanes in all directions at that intersection and to do some additional work. And the third alternative for that last $4.5 million would be to do a portion of the Phase 2 infrastructure, and this would be essentially a street network that goes north of the core laboratory building where the street now dead ends, and open up all the land on the extreme north eastern corner of the research campus at the intersection of Main Street and Loop Road. That will open that land up to additional development over time. There are a couple of projects that are out there, a couple of potential prospects that could utilize that infrastructure. That would be extending the street and related utilities into that portion of the campus. That would account for about $2.3 million. We think the real reason to go ahead and do this now, any of these projects, whichever one we ultimately choose, the construction market is as good as it's ever going to be right now. So these are conservative numbers that could be even lower than that. In fact, all the projects on this list, essentially all of them, could come in lower potentially than what they've been projected. So we think that they're critical needs. They were always part of the plan, and there's not a better time to pursue that. So that would be the answer for the $4.5 million additional funding gap that is created with the COPS issuance. I'll be happy to answer questions, give you more details about the projects. These projects are same projects that have really been on the list from the beginning. So really they're no mystery, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them about that.
In regards to the Health Alliance building, I understand that I think you said that the construction costs came in at $8.3 million?
That's correct.
Okay. I was not aware that there was roughly another $6.7 million in other expenses, because I was thinking that, I think with the housing, not the housing unit, but with the law enforcement building, our furnishings and all that ran about 2%, 3% of the cost?
We used, I think.
Mr. Downs?
The budget number, we've not got all the costs in, but the budget number for that project was somewhere between 1.5%, 2%.
Okay. That concerns me that we're basically almost 70% more on the additional cost, but that's not neither here nor there in regards to this. But the question is the construction of the building. I understand the construction of the building has come down quite a bit.
I will add, Mr. Chairman, $2.5 million of that is projected for land acquisition. So
2.5?
2.5 million. So it's about 2.8 million for internal items, IT, infrastructure, furniture, medical facilities, or medical equipment, those sorts of things. But that's about the extent of my knowledge on that. That would be something Dr. Pilton would have to answer.
Okay. Before, if this were to go forward and before it goes to the local government commission, LGC, the 4.5 would have to be decided on, correct?
That's
You just
correct.
can't go to them and say, hey, we'd like 4.5 million on economic development.
Yes, we will have to define all these projects
Okay.
to the greatest extent possible. This is a little unique. TIF is generally not the kind of, which is where we started with all this, is not the kind of financing that you have everything decided up front. It's more speculative in nature, so it's a little bit of a hybrid. But we intend to get as good a numbers as we possibly can before we take it to them,
Now-
short of bids.
Okay, but when you go, do you go to the LGC with exact numbers, with as close as possible number? I mean, what is it that you have, when you go to the local government commission, how strong or solid are those numbers?
Well, we like them to be rock solid. In an ideal world, you would have contracts ready to sign with contractors, you would have all of your bids in hand, you'd have all of your permits in hand, and the only thing lacking would be the financing. That's in an ideal world. We often find ourselves in situations where we don't have that. But what you don't want to do is split a financing into multiple parts and therefore entail multiple cost of issuance, multiple approvals. And so sometimes we will have a small component of the financing where we don't necessarily have all of those costs nailed down, the permits nailed down. And that's the conversation that you have with the local government commission to determine sort of what that appropriate balance is.
I think with the exception of the last three projects I just mentioned, that would be the last one chosen on this list. The rest of them are in that more complete category. We have good numbers on everything but that. So.
Okay. And if the Health Alliance building were at a different location, it would be a savings of there was no land acquisition, so that's about $2.5 million that would come off of this, right?
If you had a site.
Right. Or at least, you don't know what the amount is.
There's $2.5 million needed for this site.
Okay. Any questions? Anything else? You're going to the next slide?
The next slide, just in terms of the financing calendar and next steps, Our objective, our understanding is that the Health Alliance has those construction bids, and they're good until the end of the year. And so this calendar was built around closing the financing in December so that the Health Alliance could sign that construction contract before the bid expires. So there's a lot that has to be done in order for us to hit that milestone. You can see that we have this meeting that we're in today. The city would hold its public hearing on November the 8th. We would have our first review session with the Local Government Commission on November the 9th. We've had multiple conference calls with them. They're aware of this financing calendar, aware of this meeting today, and say that from their perspective, this is an achievable and reasonable calendar. We would then ask that you approve the interlocal agreement during your November 15th meeting. We would, the day after that, submit the application to the Local Government Commission. We would send documents to the rating agencies to get the rating, and you'll see in this schedule several conference calls and meetings to review documents, finalize documents. The next major milestone is December the 7th, which is when the Local Government Commission meets the first Tuesday of each month. So we would receive their approval on the 7th, and they cannot take action until the city and the county have approved everything. And then at that point, we would be in a position the following day to mail what we call the POS, the preliminary official statement, the offering document to investors, and sell the bonds, price the bonds a week later, and then close the financing 2 weeks after that. So it's a busy calendar, but one that everybody in the working group and the Local Government Commission and the rating agencies have all signed off on and said that they think it's achievable. The schedules after that, I won't go through unless there's specific questions. Happy to field those, but these are the detailed numbers that were used, that were summarized in the PowerPoint presentation. I think we covered those in pretty good detail. So at this point, maybe we'll just open it up for any remaining questions.
There was one, I did have one question. There was this underwriter's discount of $216,700, which would, if we were to go forward with it, would reduce the sale to, or the financing to $36,065,000. That was not reflective of the first page, on the first page that we went through.
Right. If you'll back up just one slide before that, you'll see what we have is the bond par amount of $35,340,000, and then a reoffering premium that's generated from the sale of the bonds of $942,000, which gets us to that total sources of funds of $36,282,575. Then we back out of that the underwriter's discount, that $216,000, to get to the net proceeds that are available, and that's what on that following page. That addition and subtraction I just went through is what you see. If you go now forward to the next page, it does that calculation. The software does that calculation at the bottom. So it shows you the par amount, the $35,340,000, plus that reoffering premium of $942,000, gets you to production or total sources of funds of $36.2 million. Subtract out the underwriter's discount, and it gets you to a purchase price or net proceeds of $36,065,000. And so it's that $36,065,000 that we then put into those different buckets. $31 million goes into the project fund, $3.5 million goes into the debt service reserve fund, $780,000 into the capitalized interest fund, and $750,000 into the cost of issuance.
There's, I was looking through, and I didn't get all the way through the interlocal agreement or intergovernmental agreement. There seems to be just some Scrivener's errors is what I would say. Just has Mr. Cordell talked to you, Mr. Jeffcoat, about any of those issues or any of those differences?
No,
I didn't know
he
if you had a chance to talk to him about
No,
it.
we have not had a chance. I talked with him briefly on Friday and gave him both the black line and the clean version. And I expect that he will have comments to that.
Okay, and the reason why I say that, I think like some of the, if we were to go through this, the repayments may be on different than what's in the agreement that I was looking on over the weekend, and I can't find it real quick here. I think this is at the beginning, page 74, or page 4 of your document, Mr. Jeff Code, is February the 15th and August 15th, beginning August 15th, 2011. I don't know if that, that doesn't put in the 2 years delay.
No,
So
it does
there are
not.
little things like that.
It
is
does not, because I did not have these numbers in front of me when we were doing it. So
Okay.
that'll all be fixed, of course. And the dates on payments are likely to move based on the dated date of the obligations and the payment dates for the obligations themselves. So all of that will be coordinated, so.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? The things that jump out at me that I want to get a better understanding of is the increase in value, the 3% every year as opposed to during the reval. I don't know how that changes everything, if it changes anything at all. Number one, the cost of issuance certainly is a concern of mine. The total price for the Health Alliance building, like I said, I thought it was, the construction cost was about, I believe Mr. Legg said 8.3 million. Just in comparisons, and I know it's not apples to apples, but the additional cost of 6.7 million for furnishings and the like, I think, and the land cost. I look at that as an issue. Is this the right site, or is another site in the county that we have some land available that would save $2.5 million off the land cost or land purchasing? And what does that mean? So I think that's a discussion that this board needs to have amongst itself, and then have a discussion with the Health Alliance in regards to that. But and then a further clarification of the $4.5 million, and Mr. Legg addressed that in regards to the utilities. I wrote down capacity building, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Not a building
Traffic capacity.
Traffic capacity,
Yeah.
okay.
Building turn lanes and those kinds of things.
The traffic capacity, or starting phase 2, affecting Main Street and Loop Road. Those are the three things those are some of the things that jumped out at me. But those are the things that are my concerns, or things that I think that we as a board need to at least discuss, to have some comfort level if we're going to move forward, if we're going to move forward. If those get addressed as it relates to me, I don't have any problems with it in theory. The one thing that I don't know how you account for is we're all striving, the city and the county is striving to keep a low tax rate. And how do you protect if we do cut the tax rate, or able to cut the tax rate 1 cent, 2 cents? I mean, that ends up being huge on a project such as this. And I don't know how you project for that. And since the county's not signing on to the debt, we don't have to worry about it. But, I think that's the reality, is we're always trying to cut our tax rate, trying to keep the lowest tax rate possible. And if that becomes a reality, how does Kannapolis plan for that? I guess I don't have to worry about that, but I do.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, the fact that we've not factored in any development on the campus into this I think is important. There's a project building now, getting closer to fruition, that could be a $20+ million project on the campus. That alone will generate enough taxes to serve as a pretty good buffer going forward. So I think the fact that we've not done that, not
Okay.
factored even one more penny being expended in private investment on the campus, bodes well long-term for us. So I think we could weather those kind of storms pretty easily.
And I apologize for not telling it earlier, is making certain the interlocal agreement, some of these concerns or not concerns, but issues are resolved. And I don't, until I go through it all the way and try and understand it better, I can't tell you what comes up, but I do think that just a few of the dates, few of the, where I think it says 2011, I think it means a different date, and that would be between Mr. Jeffcoat and Mr. Cordell would be able to flesh out a lot of those issues, because I think that Mr. Cordell understands what our concerns are, and if they haven't been, they will probably be discussed. I wouldn't say concerns, as it relates to the document right now, that could be fleshed out. So that's a concern, but really not a big concern, because I think that will be dealt with.
The only other thing I've got, I guess, is that, and that's that, and sorry for being late, so I may have talked about this before I got here, but and it's on the Health Alliance, is that, like I say, we're going to have the discussion with them, but the big thing is the ownership, not the location. So you could still go forward with this, even if if there's some discussion after it's approved about the location, as long as the ownership is what's the important thing, right?
Yeah, a couple of things on that.
Because if we did do that with our land, we saved that money.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be approved based on them being on the site in Kannapolis, but
Yeah, there's a couple of things on that. One, the most critical piece to this is that we do have to have the Health Alliance building put up as collateral as
Right.
part of
Oh, yeah,
this.
yeah, I'm just- as far as
So
ownership.
we will have to own it, the city will have to own it for the duration of the debt. After that, it's up between the county and the Cabarrus Health Alliance, who actually owns the property. So we have to resolve that. So if it's outside the city, that's probably, it could be problematic, I don't know. But more importantly, I think to the practical side of that is, there's a very strong future tie that needs to be created between the Health Alliance, the lower income population, and the research that's occurring on the campus. And I think proximity is important. And I think Dr. Pilkington will tell you, he's already told you that, I believe. So I think proximity is important in this case. It's only 2 miles from the current site. It's not like we're moving it 8 or 9 miles away. I mean, it's only a few miles from the current site. And, more selfishly, from the city's perspective, having the 200+ workers in downtown Kannapolis is a positive thing, especially in the short term, over the next 5 or 6 years, to create more synergy between downtown businesses, restaurants, small business in downtown Kannapolis. So, from that perspective, we think the site is good. I understand the county's concerned about the dollars, but we think there's other reasons why that site makes sense as well. Just want to make sure that was on the record.
Any other questions? The projection, as I see it, is asking for us to place this on November the 15th for a vote to go forward with the interlocal agreement. Is that correct, Mr. Legg?
That's correct. That's the request.
Okay.
I'll make a motion, we put it on new business for the 15th. And I guess with that, it reiterate, support it for us if we got any more issues or questions that come up that might question whether or not we, vote on it, that we get those answered before the 15th because of the criticality of the timeline.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. I will second it, that we put it on for November the 15th for discussion under new business. Any further discussion?
Well, I'm just wondering, when do you propose that we talk about the Health Alliance building?
We can talk about it now, if we want to.
I just wanted, because that's, for example, if the land cost was saved, then the discussion also would need to be reducing the COPS amount by that $2.5 million, or how that would work out too. I mean, that would figure in there also. So that's why I'm just asking when we're planning on talking about the Health Alliance building. So.
We can talk about the Health Alliance building today. It was, if we do the interlocal agreement and we were to, if we agreed in principle to the interlocal agreement, then we're talking about the numbers. Is that correct, Mr. Legg? is that instead of, if we approve the interlocal agreement as in principle, and we discuss about the Health Alliance staying where it is, then whatever that number is stays in there. If we discuss about a different location, then it's just a matter of changing the number, reflecting that new number.
So
Yeah,
if you're issuing a not to exceed, aren't
I don't
you?
think that'll have any material impact on our approvals. I mean, ideally, the LGC is going to want to know where, so between now and the time we go to the LGC, we're going to have to nail that down. But between now and the 15th, I don't think it changes anything. The amount potentially.
But I believe, don't we issue COPS when we do schools? Don't we issue those at a not to exceed number? I mean, or do we issue the exact amount?
Yeah, there have been times when we actually had to include the bids.
Okay.
That we had been awarded, that had been awarded, so it
Okay.
depends on the LGC's comfort level.
Okay.
Good thing is on that project, which is half of this entire issue, is, there are bids in hand. The location, I don't think will change the bids, so I wouldn't think, maybe a little, but not
It
dramatically.
actually would cost less, so I would think it would be,
Well, if we need a not to exceed, if we were to just do round numbers, we got 8.3. If we had 10% for upfit, furnishings, that takes it to another 800,000, which is $9.1 million. Excuse me, $9.13 million. If we had the old fairgrounds, we could place it on the old, or we could request that it be placed at the old fairgrounds. And then the upfit cost would be no more than 10%, which would be furnishings. I'm sorry if it'd be furnishings, architecture. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
You're gonna have engineering, some IT, technology type stuff.
Okay. Why don't we do this, is we've got a breakdown of the Health Alliance building, is that correct, Mr. Downs? We can get copies of that for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. I think that was emailed out earlier to everybody. I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at it. Why don't we get copies of that for everybody so that we can look at that and we can discuss the Health Alliance building. And if, Commissioner Poole, do you want to wait on a vote in regards to placing this under new business?
No, that's fine, to go ahead. I just wanted to
We can talk about the Health
clarification.
Alliance building by the end of the day.
That's
I
fine.
just don't want to hold up Mr. Legg and
And that's fine to go
Mayor
ahead with the
Meisenheimer.
vote. You already have the motion and second. That's fine to go ahead and with vote. I just want to make sure we were going to talk about it
Okay.
before we got too far out to have a problem.
Why don't we pick that up so that the people that are here in regards to schedule things, we can have the presentations on the schedule matters, and then we can talk about the Health Alliance building towards the end of the meeting today, and so we're not disrupting others that are here. We have this motion, we have a second, place this under new business on November the 15th to discuss the interlocal, or to, for a vote as it relates to the interlocal agreement. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. And we will discuss the Health Alliance building shortly after we have the other presentations under new business.
Thank
One
you,
more
Mr.
question,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just
Yes.
on this. We're not required, we'll make sure, we're not required to have a public hearing for this. This is, because it's an interlocal agreement, we're not obligating any debt, so we're not, okay. We'll make sure we don't get to the 11th hour and realize it.
Next matter we have is G2, found on page 83. And that is the Atondo Road Public Right-of-Way Abandonment Public Hearing.
If you remember, we started this process back in July. You all passed a resolution asking DOT to abandon maintenance. That was approved at the October meeting for DOT's board. So now the next step for us is to hold a public hearing on the abandonment of the public right-of-way. It is about .028 of a mile. So it's a very short section. You have a map in your packet. You can see it does not affect any other property owners. It's only the county property, so that some security measures can be put in at the farm, and also so that a turnaround can be put in front of the gates so that the bus can turn around. And we just need to hold a public hearing in case is anyone that would like to comment on that.
I move we place this on new business for a public hearing.
We have a
Second.
motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Next matter we have is G3, which is the cooperative extension discussion related to the creation of a Cabarrus Youth Council. Page 92 of our agenda. Ms. Bost,
Good evening, good afternoon. I'm used to saying good evening, good afternoon.
hello.
We're excited to be here today to talk to you about some new initiatives and new ideas. And I'm going to introduce two of our Cabarrus County 4-H'ers. They are members of our county council, and they've been officers and involved in several statewide programs. In 4-H, we have Taylor Furr, and then we have Ellabeth Wycliffe here, along with Heather Jones, our 4-H agent. So, and as you know, this is a discussion related to the creation of a Cabarrus County Youth Council. As you know, your association, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, has been very supportive of trying to encourage youth to become more engaged in county government. And so this would propel Cabarrus County forward in making some of those things happen here locally. So I'll let Heather give us an overview.
Okay, I think it's just very fitting, actually, that we were here today because Taylor, as we were sitting there, she said, look who's out in the hallway. And Senator Hartzell actually hosted Taylor and Ella at a citizenship event in Raleigh this past June. And at that event is where Taylor and Ella came up with the action plan to implement a youth council in Cabarrus County. So at that event, the young people go to local government, state government related workshops, how to talk to elected officials, and then they have to leave there with a plan after they've also had time to visit with our state legislators. So they came up with this plan and talked about what they wanted to do, and essentially what the council wants to do is identify and then strategize how to deal with issues facing youth in the county. At the same time, learning about local government and learning about what you all do, working directly with commissioners and educating other young people on local government. So what we've proposed is that there would be 2 members to this council from each of our high schools, including A.L. Brown, the 7 from Cabarrus, and then A.L. Brown, and then 2 at-large members that could be from any homeschool or private school or the PLC or early college, any of our other high schools in the county. And the group would then meet together, like I said, to identify issues facing youth, and then work with you all to do something about those issues, not just talk about them, but be very action-oriented and do something about them. So that's just a rundown of what the group would do, and when I was looking at this, it has your mission and vision at the end, which I've actually never looked at, and saw that in the vision is that our citizens participate, and I think that this is just a perfect way to encourage that for our youth to participate in county government and then teach others about it and their parents at the same time. So, do you have any questions?
What happens if 2 from each school are not available? I know there's ways to work it in. Have you thought about if 2 from Mount Pleasant don't want to be a member, only 1 person or none? How do you pick up the extra students to make out 18?
I hadn't thought about it that way. I thought about it in positive terms that we'd have more than enough. And
You're not a lawyer.
The timing is good for recruitment because several of you have participated or will participate in Cabarrus 4-H Citizenship Focus, which takes place here in this building. And I go and visit those schools, and so to be able to talk about this when I go visit those schools, I think is perfect timing, and we're actually doing it at A.L. Brown as well. So I was just, thinking we'd have too many, and our first application committee would be Taylor and Ella. And so the students will complete an application, and I mean, we're open to suggestions. This is a work in progress. If we get to a point where we really want to start and we don't have two from Mount Pleasant or we don't have two from Northwest, then, whatever you think.
I think working with the school counselors, and the civics classes, the civics teachers, they've been so supportive of the Cabarrus 4-H Citizenship Focus Program. And in fact, at this point, we've got more requests than we can serve for this facility because we're going to use every available space in November and December that is available for youth to be here. And so I really think that it bodes well for this type of program where youth are going to be really engaged in the process. And I think the civics teachers and school counselors and principals are going to be able to help us identify those kids that would really rise to the challenge of being involved in something like this.
What are some of the issues you think would be, that the council would be youth council would be talking about?
Youth?
Taylor, Heather, you got any ideas?
I was going to let you answer that one.
Issues that I think are facing youth today are a lot of school-oriented things, and then there's just like teen apathy because people really, the people who will be on the committee will care, but putting down negative influences is also good, so.
Okay.
One of the things that happened this past August at the county commissioners' annual meeting was that youth from across the county identified issues facing them, and Ella was actually able to go to that as our Cabarrus County representative, and they came up with 10 issues, and really they clumped a lot of them together. It was probably more like 15 or 20, wasn't it? And they ranged anywhere from teen pregnancy to drugs and alcohol, gangs. There were a lot of issues, but what I think this group especially wants to focus on are things that you can help them with. So, do you want to talk more about that?
Just when we are at the convention, through this, it'll help us figure out exactly what our county commissioners do and what they are in charge of. And it'll help us to figure out what we as youth can help with, as well as how we can work with you. So just not the standard issues.
Any other? We have a motion to place this under new business.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I just want to make a comment.
Yes.
I think it's an excellent idea, and everything starts small. Been involved in a lot of things that started small and grew big because they were successful and needed. And this is certainly needed with our young people because today about the only way they know about civics is through watching Comedy Central or something of that nature. And we definitely need that balance, and we need opportunities for our young people to participate in some way helpfully in the community. So I congratulate you. Hope you're very successful.
One other thing, too, is give you some insider information. As you know, my mortgage paying job is with the association. And we're starting this Thursday and Friday is the first meeting of the Legislative Goals Committee. And then at November 18th and 19th, they'll come back together again in Raleigh to discuss goals that have been put forth by counties. And I know it's kind of short notice, and you have things on school that kind of gets in the way of that, but then in January there'll be the Legislative Goals Conference in which the commissioners will come together to consider the legislative goals that will be put forth for the legislative session. So let's just keep those in mind because those are, a lot of the issues that have been brought up or maybe brought up in August will be maybe even discussed at some of these meetings. Current President Joe Bryan from Wake County has actually his goals this year has actually included the continuation of one that Mary Aker had for the, or Acker, I guess is the right way to pronounce it, for the youth involvement. So certainly, it's going to continue to be an emphasis.
And we're very excited about having this group in place for the annual meeting to be in Cabarrus.
Mhm.
So any way that we can help with that, keep us in mind for that too. Thank you.
Good. Well, I look forward, I think it needs to be on new business so we can get out there and it gives the opportunity. The young ladies do not need to be there because it is a school night unless they would like to be there. So.
They learned a lot just a few minutes ago.
I learn a lot every time I see Senator Hartzell too. So we will have it on November the 15th. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Next matter we have is G4 is the approval of the Cabarrus County School request for A.T. Allen Elementary School and related budget amendment, page 99.
Hi.
Hey, Mrs. Klutz.
Good evening. The Cabarrus County Board of Education requests that we move $94,734 from the line item architecture into construction for the purpose of the final construction items that need to be done to close that school out. There was not enough dollars in the construction line item. We are not going over budget, and we are not asking for contingency. We're just asking to move from one line item to another. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Move we place it on the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter we have is the Code of Ethics, which was tabled from the October work session. And if memory serves me correctly, it was tabled, Mrs. Honeycutt presented it to us that she has put in here a form, Code of Ethics that is, that was given to us or to all counties by the school of government. And the suggestion was to place it under, if we voted on it as is, then at the retreat of the new board, we could refine it or retool it, I believe. But as it is, it will satisfy the needs of what the legislature is asking of us. Is that correct, Mrs. Honeycutt?
Whatever you want.
So this is kind of just to satisfy that, and then we'll take up more of a detailed
If
discussion
it needs to be, yes.
At our retreat with the new board. Okay. Should we do this under new business? Since we got to approve it though, right? We got to have something.
Well, it's in here. We could adopt the Code of Ethics as presented.
And then-
Under consent if we want to, or we can discuss exactly what each one of the Code of Ethics are. But we also have to complete a 2-hour required training for those that are on the board after December 1 or December 6.
So what's 3?
So, and that has been set up either at the Essentials of Government or Mrs. Honeycutt has purchased a webinar for as many people that are going to be able to see. And I know that some of the Health Alliance, I was passed that on to the Health Alliance Board because they want to, some of them want to participate. I don't know if anybody's talked to you about that. from the Health
They have
Alliance
not, but I
Board.
believe we have that tentatively set up for November 16th at 4 p.m. in this building, and we'll get an invitation out to all the local boards, inviting them to participate if they'd like.
So the question before us is to adopt the Code of Ethics as presented by the School of Government, or it can be delayed until December, but it has to be voted on before December the 31st.
I move we approve this, or put it on the consent agenda for the November meeting.
November 15th?
Mhm.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Commissioner Poole?
Yeah, I'm looking through the agenda. I mean, there's the example from Guilford County, and I'm not exactly certain which specific version we're talking about putting on the agenda.
The one provided by Fleming Bell from the School of Government. That's my understanding. I did include.
But that's not under this tab.
Codes. No, I didn't include that for copyright reasons, but we do.
Okay.
We did purchase
We have
a
that
copy of it.
separately. Okay, that's what I
Yes.
wanted to make sure, because when I was scanning through, it wasn't, that copy wasn't here in the attachments. I
Those
wanted to
other
make sure.
entities were just provided as examples of what other areas had done. The Guilford County was very instrumental in developing the code, so it would be very similar.
I just wanted to make clarification on which code of ethics we were going to
Oh, that's right. I did notice
place.
there.
You just said code of ethics. I want to make sure which one that we were specifically
We're talking
talking about
about school
adopting.
from the School of Government.
School of Government, yeah.
We have a motion to place, we have a second to place the School of Government Code of Ethics under the consent agenda. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. If you'll flip over to your second page, which is G6 on page 164 of our agenda, is the approval in principle of special purpose project for Carolina USA Partners LLC and the financing with recovery zone facility bonds and the principal amount up to $100 million in a public hearing on June at 6:30 p.m. Mr. Newton.
Hello.
Good
My
morning.
name's Jerry. The Philip Morris USA property is under contract to be purchased by Carolina USA Partners LLC. Both parties are working toward a closing that is anticipated to end or to occur by the end of the year. I'm working on behalf of the purchaser. Carolina USA plans to fill the vacant Philip Morris plant with new businesses and create jobs for our community. Our goal is to put people back to work through the creation of a business enterprise mall. We are doing this by bringing in many businesses. With all things working out, new tenants will be able to move into the primary building's 2.4 million square feet soon after the closing. Now, there are a lot of items that need to be put in place for this project to come together. One deals with the overall funding mechanism of the project. The project financing is being met through a combination of funds, debt sources, and private investors. One part of the financing is developing a sellable package to the bond market of the finance debt. That package is in part created by ultimately issuing recovery zone facility bonds before program expires at the end of this year. The only way these bonds can be issued is through a series of steps that are now underway. In order for that option to remain viable, the county needs to commit to hold a public hearing on November 15th. The process and all that is being done is addressed under the Federal Tax Code and the North Carolina General Statutes and Administrative Code. There are no county, state, federal funds, debts, or pledges of the county associated with the issuance of these bonds. In order to receive the bonds, the county and state, though, do have to be involved in very specific ways in the process. By being involved, these special bonds get a tax exemption similar to what the county would receive if they were selling the bonds. That is what makes the bonds attractive in the bond market, and in the current lending market, bonds become necessary for loans of this size. At today's meeting, the Board of Commissioners are being asked to call for a public hearing to be held on November 15th so the bond process can continue. If the hearing is not held, then the potential use of these bonds will no longer exist. This is but one of many steps that have to happen for this financing tool to be used. With this deal, I respectfully request that the board call for the public hearing on November 15th. Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Newton? You stated it, but I want to make certain it's very clear. The county is not issuing any bonds or going into debt for any amount of money on these recovery zone bonds.
Correct.
That is, the recovery zone bonds, if they are issued, is issued in the purchaser or the buyer of this property.
That's correct.
Okay.
Recovery zone facility bonds. There were two forms. The sunset of the bonds is December 31st this
Right.
year.
but it's issued, or this is very similar to what was happening in Iredell County at a Langtree or.
Correct.
Where the company, Mooresville, issued the recovery zone, or didn't issue, but allowed them to borrow money.
They were involved in that entire process.
Right, but they
correct.
didn't issue the bonds, they didn't borrow money or anything like that nature.
Yeah, there's no pledge, there's no exposure to the county.
Okay.
Is there anything in the issuance of these bonds that would be in conflict with any of the regulations or codes of the city of Concord or Cabarrus County, or does that not enter into it at
No,
all?
not with the bonds, no.
So, okay, we're just calling for a public hearing for those bonds to be issued if they're going to be issued by somebody, or be purchased by, or sold by somebody else, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd make a motion that we call for a public hearing.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. One matter that we have not covered is, going back to E3, Commissioner Caruth, was the Animal Preservation APAC resolution. Since you were not able to be here exactly on time, we went ahead and started, and we skipped over that, so that I didn't know if you wanted to update us, knowing that that's into the supplemental information.
Yeah, just if you could, just take that and read it. We're going to be, this was discussed somewhat in our last meeting that we had of the APAC, which was back on what was following our work session in October. Our meeting has been delayed to next Monday. We'll be meeting and we'll be discussing this and bringing this back, hopefully pretty much like it is here to us for our November meeting. There are some, this is obviously just a draft. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me, but a couple of things point out to you on here is that, the whereas recognizes the fact that we have several existing well-organized animal rescue organizations in the community, that we are euthanizing primarily because we need to have a more coordinated program. It defines no-kill, what no-kill means, and that then it goes into some specifics there that concerning guidelines, concerning the save rate, which I discussed at our October meeting, of what the APAC said they felt like we could reach 90% save rate by December 31st, 2012. We kind of ask Animal Control to provide us with a monthly report of shelter statistics, and then for the APAC to come back to this board on a recommendation on whether what they see as the best option of whether or not we would have a publicly run shelter with a position created for an adoption director, or whether it would be outsourced completely, the shelter operations, to a private organization. Then also anything additional resources that might be needed for the program in the realm of licensing, public revenue grants, or anything like that that can be identified. There are two models, and I did not have these in here, but there are two models that are out there. One of them is and I can email those links to you if you'd like me to do that. One of them is the Foothills Humane Society, which is in Polk County. It's a privately run 501c3 shelter, and it pretty much, other than the apprehension, that may be the wrong term to use, but other than the capture of any stray animals by Animal Control, which is still run by the Sheriff's Office in Polk County, pretty much at that point in time, those animals are turned over to this private humane society that then manages the shelter program for Polk County and gets funding from Polk County to do so. That's one model. The other model that looked at has been the Miami-Dade Animal Services, where they have actually a full-time director as well as several part-time employees. Of course, Miami-Dade is quite a bit larger than Cabarrus, so would not have the same staffing requirements, but they are running a publicly run shelter operation. Now, the Polk County operation has a save rate over about 93% right now. The beta stats I saw in Miami-Dade is it's quite a bit lower than that, but they have some of the same principles in place that we'd like to see probably in our shelter operation. So anyway, what we're going to do next week is talk about that and try to come up with kind of a recommendation. Now, I know that there's been, in this time, adding a position may be kind of rough for our board to consider, and even I know that with a new board, that may be a challenge to look at adding that, but looking at that as more of an investment, because in the long run, if you lower the euthanasia rate, you may also lower the cost of operating that facility as well. So it could be more than anything else, seed money that would go into that. But anyway, that's what will happen. Next Monday we'll meet, and then ask us to consider this at our November meeting. We made decided to table it until we have a discussion about it as a new board, but I thought I think it's important just to bring it to us, for us to have it in front of us. Any questions? Or on page 184, just point out there's some of the bulletin there got kind of messed up, so there's some it doesn't read exactly, it may not be completely clear there, but kind of gives some guidelines on what we'd like to see in the community adoption program.
Some of the things that, when you talk about no-kill is,
I know.
I don't like the terminology, number one, and number two is if people are misconstruing what that actually means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I put in there the definition up front. And part of the things the APAC would have to do is to develop the evaluation matrix of what is considered, because there is a category that's recognized pretty universally by several organizations, untreatable and unrehabilitatable, that those animals are the ones that, that category, there is no effort, let's say, to lower the euthanasia rate, because those are the ones that will be either too young or too sick or just too aggressive to try to rehabilitate. And other than that, they look at categorizing the other animals and trying to lower that euthanasia rate as low as possible. So there's a recognition, even in no-kill programs, there is some euthanasia that has to occur.
And I think that when you're talking about the save rate, if maybe a better understanding about what the save rate is it save rate per capita? Is it save rate overall? I mean,
that would be of the.
So that I just think that when the APAC is talking or discussing it, is understand how do we figure out the save rate, because what if less animals are taken, or not taken, are turned in or retrieved off the streets? Your percentages may be different, or if you got some really bad off health-wise or what have you, and they just cannot be adopted, because I don't want that to be misconstrued.
So we need to probably identify a period, because it's the same thing, and not that there's any similarity, but we look at occupancy rate in our hotels. Is it 30 days, 60 days, annual, rolling 12 months, that kind of thing. So thought that was a kind of a bad analogy, I suppose. But that's kind of, if you got any other concerns, feel free to email me. Bring those up, anybody. So.
We have this under old business for November the 15th.
And I make a motion.
It's already on. We put it on for November the 15th. I just wanted to get your input prior to the end of this meeting today.
Okay.
Any other discussions?
Any questions?
The last matter we have for open session is to discuss about the Health Alliance building. My suggestion is, why don't we take about a 15-minute break?
Second motion.
We can come back at 5:30.